you've got one night to save Mario from the supernatural. This game will scare you silly. Luigi's Mansion, only on Nintendo Gamecube.
Hello and welcome back to another squint through the monocle of time with ReplayRetro. I'm Matt, and on today's show we're dealing with a system you guys seem to request more than anything else. So to get you off my back, we enter the 6th generation with the Nintendo Gamecube. In 1996, Nintendo had released their 64-bit 5th generation console, the N64, into a changing market. Its cartridges were seen as old hat in the face of the new optical media-driven consoles like that of their new competitor Sony, and their generation-defining PlayStation. Nintendo may have managed to suppress old rival Sega and their largely unsuccessful Saturn, but this new competitor marketed themselves to a more grown-up audience with bigger spending power and an appetite for the latest technology. Their superior console came with all the advantages of the CD format, including higher capacity media, superior sound, and the ability to use the system as a CD player at a time when many homes had limited access to such devices. All this left the N64 languishing in 2nd place, with less than a third of Sony's sales. For the 6th generation, Nintendo had a fight on their hands, and so in '98 they turned to N64 ally Dr. Wei Yen, whose former Silicon Graphics colleagues now worked with him at his new company ArtX, and began work on the system logic and graphics processor codenamed Flipper for a new system. Seeking to bring even more firepower to the project, Nintendo turned to IBM to supply a PowerPC-based 485 MHz CPU for the system, and then to Panasonic to help make the switch to optical media, having burned their bridges with both Philips and Sony earlier. In 1999, work on a successor to the N64 is revealed to the public under the codename Dolphin, a codename which would be referenced throughout the system's life, including the Isle Delfino from Super Mario Sunshine, as well as the SS Dolphin from Pikmin. A year later, ArtX were acquired by graphics experts ATI, who saw the collaboration with Nintendo as a huge step towards market dominance, calling the new console King of the Hill in terms of graphics and video performance. That same year, a Nintendo press conference officially announced the imminent arrival of the GameCube, and at E3 2001, the system's launch titles were revealed. Notably absent from this lineup, however, was company mascot Mario, whose brother instead took the limelight with Luigi's Mansion, making it the first Nintendo console to launch without their flagship Mario series. In September 2001, the system officially launched in Japan, followed by the US release in November 2001, where it was briefly delayed to increase stock volume. The rest of the world would have to wait until 2002 to get their hands on Nintendo's new box, including the UK, where it launched in May with a price tag of $129.99, making it significantly cheaper than Sony's new PlayStation 2, as well as industry newcomer Microsoft's 783 MHz gaming powerhouse, the Xbox. As for Sega, well, their new system, the Dreamcast, had already been discontinued, and the company had left the hardware market. Keen to learn from the mistakes of the N64, Nintendo made sure their new controller was far more comfortable than a console. However, unlike the Xbox, no internal storage was included. Nintendo also wanted to make it easier for third parties to make games for their new system, designing it around developers more so than gamers, with their philosophy being, what's going to allow the Miyamoto-sans of the world to develop the best games? As such, they opted for a simple programming architecture, and worked to ensure the system would provide more power per penny. Their decision to switch to optical media also helped by reducing the production costs and allowing far greater storage for bigger, better games. However, in their quest to make piracy more difficult, they chose a 3-inch disc, similar in technology to the largely unused mini-DVD format. This meant that both the Xbox and PS2 offered developers far greater storage per disc, and also left the GameCube being the only console at the time unable to be used as a DVD player, a feature heavily pushed by Sony's marketing of the PS2, which was at one point the cheapest DVD player on the market. The system did, however, offer online functionality with both a dial-up modem and a broadband adapter in a similar vein to the Dreamcast. However, unlike Microsoft, who offered their Xbox Live service, Nintendo instead made the individual publishers responsible for running their own online systems, and as a result, only 2 games ever supported this functionality. However, many games, including Mario Kart Double Dash, did support multiplayer over a local area network, and it's possible to use other products like X-Link Kai to make these games work over the internet, showing that Nintendo really missed a trick in opting out of pushing online play themselves. Despite these issues, Nintendo's efforts to make the system easy to work with meant the GameCube received some fantastic third-party support, including some notable exclusives like Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. These were of course backed up by the usual arsenal of Nintendo big guns, such as its best-selling game, Super Smash Bros. Melee, as well as the surprising arrival of Sega franchises on the system, including new ones like Super Monkey Ball. It also featured some real innovations, such as the Game Boy Player, allowing you to play Game Boy, Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games on your TV. A Game Boy Advance link cable allowing special features to be unlocked in games, as well as second screen options, like that used in the brilliant Pac-Man Versus. And the system was even capable of 3D, with Luigi's Mansion designed specifically with that feature in mind. Although Nintendo chose to lock this out, as they had little faith in the technology becoming affordable to consumers anytime soon. With so much going for it, it's hard to see at first glance how this tiny little box, jam-packed with fun, could ever have failed. But before we investigate why, let's take a look at the hardware itself and a few of the games. The hardware comes in a wide range of colours. My PAL one here is silver and my Japanese one is of course purple, which is the main colour that I think most people remember the system as being. It was probably the primary launch colour, and I do think it looks a lot better than the silver one, in fairness. The console itself is really, really small. I mean, obviously it's difficult to use my hands for scale, but if you use the game case, which is a standard DVD size case, you can see that even with the handle, the system really is very small. It's an incredibly small system. And to go with that easy portability, you have this nice chunky handle on the back, so that if you wanted, you could easily carry it round to a friend's house and play your game there. It's slightly unnecessary, and I don't really know how many people did that, and those that did probably used a carrying case or a bag anyway, but it's still a really cool thing for the system to be that small. On the front you can see that there are 4 controller ports marked up with dots representing the different players, and 2 slots for the memory cards. On the top you have the CD bay itself, and now access via the open button. You have a power button, and of course a reset button. On the sides you have vents, as you would expect. The rear, as we've already said, you find the handle. You also find the power supply and the power supply socket, and the sockets for connecting it to the TV, either via the digital AV out cable or the analog AV out cable, the socket of which you will recognise from other systems, including the N64 and the Super Nintendo. It's the same socket that goes through for the analog. Underneath, you find a number of ports for various add-ons, including the 2 modems. So you've got high-speed port, serial port 1, and of course serial port 2, just over there. These were used for things like the modem or the Game Boy Player, and that really is all you actually get on the system itself. You can see of course that you've got the ATI logo there, as of course the graphics for the system were by ATI. The controller obviously also came in colours which match the system, so there is obviously a silver controller and there are different coloured controllers depending on what system you bought. It's actually quite a nice comfortable controller to hold, especially when you consider how uncomfortable to hold the N64 one can be. These mouldings here fit really well into the sides of your hands, and you're sort of automatically drawn to the right position. I have quite big hands, but even mine fit comfortably on here. You have a really nice analog stick. The D-pad is a bit small, a bit hard to use, but you don't really use it for a lot. Another analog stick here, which is the C stick. Your B and A buttons, actually your primary gameplay buttons. I like the fact that the A button is so big because it's clearly designed to be the most used button in most games or on menus, and so they make it nice and big so that you automatically go straight to it. Y and X buttons, just above those. And these nice big analog triggers that really have quite a lot of travel on. You feel like you get a lot out of those triggers. They really do go a long way, which when you're driving a car, for example, is great, having some real control over your acceleration. And of course you have the Z button, which is a little bumper. Really very little travel on that. I always found it quite odd that it barely even seems to click, really. You do get a decent length of controller cord, which is always useful on systems with wired controllers. And of course the proprietary plug there, it just goes straight into the GameCube, so that's ready to go. The games, as you've already just seen, come in standard DVD cases, despite them not being standard DVD size. This is of course Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Inside you can see the disc itself is a really small disc. Compare this to a standard DVD, such as the cinematic masterpiece Step Up, and you really do get an idea of how different the size is. It's, you know, it's probably less than half the size, really. And while that did make it harder for pirates, it also made it harder for developers to fit content on the disc. It had to be a lot more compressed, and even then you couldn't fit as much on as the dual-layer full-size DVDs that the PS2 and the Xbox were capable of. So that really was a bit of a problem, but at least Nintendo had gone to optical media finally. So of course when you want to play, you simply pop the game in to the drive, pop it closed, press the power button, and of course if it was plugged in, the power light here, this tiny little power light would come on, and you'd be ready to play Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance.
Round 1. Fight!
Deadly Alliance is much as you would expect from a Mortal Kombat game, which obviously predictability in this case is no bad thing. We all buy a Mortal Kombat game wanting a lot of blood and to beat the hell out of something. And this is no exception to that, really. Sorry, it's quite hard to talk while playing fighting games. Oh, that was never going to end well. Yeah, the kind of moves that you expect are all in here. And it's a good solid game. I think for every system that you own, a beat 'em up is kind of a necessity to your library. Whether or not you are a Mortal Kombat guy, a Street Fighter guy, an Art of Fighting guy, a Tekken guy, whatever it is you want. No, it's one of those things that you have to have. You're always going to have a fighting game, you're always going to have a racing game. And yeah, this version of Mortal Kombat is as good as any. A little bit clunky in places, but... But yeah, it's a perfectly good Mortal Kombat game, just as you would expect. Probably not one of the best in the series, but not one of the worst either. Ah no, I meant to do a finishing move. So next up then is Spy Hunter, another Midway game, this time seeing you put in command of the ultimate Bond car basically. Ultra sporty car with of course integrated weapons systems, which I think you can change. You might unlock more as the game goes on. A number of cool features. The car can also transform itself into a boat, a motorbike, and possibly a jet ski, if I remember rightly. I don't think it ever gets to fly, though. Seems like they missed a trick there, but let's face it, you've got to keep it realistic. You can't have it morphing into a boat, a motorbike, a jet ski, and a plane. Realistically, one of those things had to be left out. It's a mission-orientated game. This is kind of your test level, really. This is just getting used to the car and how it handles in its various forms. Basically, your James Bond driving test. Weirdly, the acceleration in this game uses the A button instead of those lovely analog triggers, which I always found a bit odd, really. Obviously those triggers are brilliantly designed for acceleration and braking. But by default, the A button is the accelerator button here. Just a little bit odd, really. And you would have thought that a company like Midway, whose heritage is basically in the arcades, you would have thought they would want that kind of analog performance that normally their arcade hardware would be able to give them. Graphically, it's not a bad little game. It does look quite cool, especially when you get moments like this where your car's diving into the water and converting into boat mode. It could be a little bit more polished on the graphics front, but it isn't bad at all. The audio is also really good. Graphically speaking, the draw distance is solid. You know, if they'd pushed the graphics much further, then they might not have been able to get... Reverse, damn it! Oh, you can't reverse the boat, apparently. Then obviously they could have had problems with draw distance, whereas here the draw distance is pretty decent. How many times can you say draw distance in one sentence? Lots, apparently. All in all, it is a pretty solid game. It's also quite a cheap game. Many GameCube games at the minute seem to have really escalated in price. Mainly probably because of it being a Nintendo product. Whereas, yeah, the Spy Hunter is still quite a cheap game, and definitely one that is worth picking up if you do see it for a few pence. So yeah, that's Spy Hunter. Let's take a look at one more game.
Move it, you maggots, move it!
Lastly then, we have Medal of Honor Rising Sun. Your typical FPS Medal of Honor from back before Call of Duty had really taken over the first-person genre.
Follow me, Marine! We need to get topside right now!
As you would expect, you have a single-player campaign mode. You also have a two-player campaign mode. And, of course, a multiplayer versus mode. Because that is, let's face it, what people tend to buy FPSs for, especially these days. Where have I gone? Aha, up these stairs, that would be useful. Graphically, again, it's not terrible. This is a 2003 game.
Watch it! Crouch under! Let's get out of here! Oh, damn the hatch!
It could be better, but like many games of its generation, it hasn't aged brilliantly.
Over here! I found the exit!
The audio, though, is it's THX based audio on this, so THX, and it is really, really good quality audio. I don't know how well it's going to come across in the video, but it is brilliant audio.
I need a fire extinguisher! Give me that thing!
As I say, these days the Medal of Honor franchise has disappeared, but at this point it was still producing good games, and they were more story-driven than a lot of modern FPSs are.
Call headquarters!
These days, FPSs seem to be sold with the story mode basically being tacked on to what is essentially a multiplayer shooter. Whereas at this point, they were still quite story-driven. The story hadn't quite taken a back seat yet.
On your plane, Marine! Please step out of it! Step out of it!
As you'd expect, you get opportunities like this where you can take control of large guns. You take part in a variety of different missions and different fights. And it's all very cinematic style. all in all, another fairly good game to pick up really, if you can handle the aged graphics.
By 2003, low sales meant that Nintendo actually had too much stock and stopped producing consoles for a good part of that year before a series of price cuts brought the system under £100 and saw sales pick up. But sadly, this slump put the third parties, who Nintendo had worked so hard to attract, off the system. Its small form and colourful exterior also led to it being seen as more of a toy than a serious piece of hardware, and so it struggled to attract the now huge adult gaming market. This wasn't helped by Nintendo's child-friendly image, or by that lack of DVD functionality, a feature which by now was serving the PS2 very well, and certainly hadn't hurt the Xbox either. Later, as part of a business deal, Japan would see the release of the Panasonic Q, a DVD player and GameCube hybrid with a much cooler look. But this would never see a Western release, and was also vastly more expensive than the standard GameCube, leading to it being swiftly discontinued. By 2005, the Xbox 360 had arrived and the PS3 was on its way, signalling the end of the 6th generation. And when the dust settled, the winner was clear. Sony had once again dominated the market with sales of around 155 million consoles worldwide, with Microsoft taking second place selling over 24 million units, Nintendo falling back into third with just short of 22 million units, and Sega gone forever with just over 9 million units sold. This meant the GameCube had sold less than the N64, with some media outlets calling it an unmitigated disaster and speculating over the death of the company. However, things were far from over for Nintendo, who realised that while they couldn't beat their new rivals in this hardcore gaming world, they could instead go back to the drawing board, dust off those motion control plans, and release the Wii, a console far less powerful than the 360 or the PS3, but one which brought a unique and fascinating new way to play, which would see the company rise to reclaim the #1 spot in the 7th generation, proving that in this industry, nobody stays at the top or the bottom forever. Even better, the Wii would be fully compatible with the GameCube's controllers and library of over 600 games, and so even when the system was finally discontinued a year later in 2007, its games would live on and be enjoyed by a generation discovering them for the first time. That's all we've got time for on today's show. As always, you can get in touch via our Twitter or Facebook, and of course you can support the show on Patreon. And don't worry, I'll be back soon with more from the annals of gaming history. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, the video you just watched was voted for by fans of the show, so if you'd like to take part in the next vote and help decide what videos I make next, then head over to our Patreon subscription page and find out how you